Worshiping with you today. My wife Marilyn and I don't get the opportunity to stay this close to home very often. But in the 28 years that we've lived in this community, we've crossed paths with many of you in one setting or another. It's good to see some familiar faces, and some of you we haven't met yet. But you know, in God's family, we all belong. In fact, we're all part of a larger church family. It goes beyond Chattanooga First Church. The Georgia-Cumberland Conference is one other expression of God's family. It includes about 37,000 members across parts of 3 states. In fact, we just organized our newest church last Sabbath in Atlanta. It was the Atlanta Nigerian Church. The world is coming to us. Yes, we have a responsibility to go to the world, but we'll take it any way it happens. And it's incredible to recognize that on any given Sabbath, we worship in about 10 different languages right here in Georgia-Cumberland. We are, in fact, all part of God's family. Today, we think about Christmas and what it means, the beauty of these decorations, the excitement that anyone who has children knows is building. Christmas is a special time of year, is it not? And yet, for some of us, there are concerns at this time of the year as at any time of the year. Worry knows no season. Disappointment and heartache can catch us at any time. Gary Snyder was a 16-year-old mountaineer who wanted to do something special on this particular New Year's weekend. He was talking to a couple of his buddies who were also mountain climbers, and they hatched a plan. They were going to do something incredible, something that would be memorable, something that they would remember the rest of their lives. They were going to climb Mount Hood. They lived in the valley, not far away. They attended Walla Walla Valley Academy. They said, "We want to watch the sunrise on New Year's Day in the bicentennial year of the United States of America, 1976, we're going to be on top of Mount Hood." And all 3 of them, knowing what they were getting into, packed their gear and headed up the mountain. Yes, this was the last day of 1975. They knew their way. They had been there before. It wasn't long before they were on the Saddleback area above Illumination Rock. They bedded down for the night, looking up at the beautiful sky above them, knowing that in just a few hours they'd be back out of their bags and on their way to the summit. And that's the way you have to do when you're climbing mountains of significance. You get up in the pre-dawn hours, which they did on January 1, 1976, and headed for the summit. Amazing to watch the sun rise over that huge valley before them. Lights that they originally saw illuminating little towns and even the distant lights of Portland gave way to the brighter light in the sky. They spent time drinking it in, congratulating each other. This was indeed a great idea. On the way back down the mountain, they had time, plenty of time. This was a holiday. This was Christmas vacation. This was New Year's Day. And so they paused partway down the mountain to spend one more night. And to do so, they thought, we've got plenty of snow up here. Let's build a snow cave. They built the mother of all snow caves with separate sleeping areas, almost bunks, you could call it. Well, at least sleeping platforms and places for their gear. This was a beauty of a snow cave with a ventilation pipe at the top, and you know, they did it right so that there was a little bit of a decline and then out into the outside. They kept shoving the snow outside. It took them much of the afternoon to construct the snow cave, and little did they realize as they were doing so that it had begun snowing outside. They went to sleep that night, woke up the next morning to a complete whiteout. They could not see 6 feet. It was snowing and blowing. They said, "Well, we asked for adventure. I guess we got it." And so they settled in and talked and told stories and laughed and had a good time, knowing that Mountain storms come and go. It would just be a matter of a few hours and it'd be over and they'd be on their way down the mountain. Not so. Next morning, same conditions, more snow. They took turns pushing the snow to clear out their ventilation shaft. Day after day went by. The excitement began to wane. So did the food and the fuel. 5 days, 6 days. The little stove that they had to melt the snow to turn it into water ran out of fuel. But these boys were praying boys. They kept saying, God, keep this thing going. And it did for 5 more days. It continued to melt snow for them. On day 9, the food ran out. Still, the conditions were impossible. They read their Bibles. They sang songs. They prayed. Day 12, day 13, day 14. Gary thought a lot about his dad. PE teacher at Walla Walla Valley Academy, experienced mountaineer. He knew his dad would not be sitting at home. He knew his dad would be combing the mountain. He would be a part of the search process. He would be doing anything he could to get him out. But he did remember, at a time like this, with plenty of time on his hands, Gary thought about the arguments and the misunderstandings and the hassles that they had been going through lately. But he knew his dad loved him and just hoped that he'd keep looking. Have you ever found yourself in a good situation turned bad? Started out with high hopes, great plan, but somewhere along the line, things began to come apart. Oh, it could have been as early as high school and college. You thought you knew which direction you were headed, and you knew if you got the degree, you'd be launched into the future. Only to realize that the degree didn't launch you anywhere. It may be that you thought marriage was the solution. That was the objective. That would bring wholeness and completeness to your life. And sure enough, you got married and you were miserable. Or maybe it was kids, or maybe it was the next promotion, or maybe it was a move to a new place. Regardless, we have these dreams, these ideals, these goals that seem so lofty and so laudable, but sometimes they just don't happen the way we had anticipated. What then? Well, the Bible, even this season of the year, speaks to disillusionment. And I'd invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 2, a familiar passage, part of which we read during our scripture reading just a few moments ago. Matthew chapter 2, my Bible simply labels the first section, The Visit of the Magi. And we sang not long ago, We Three Kings of Orient Are. Yeah, that's the story. That's the Bible story. And let's see what it says. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, I'm reading from the New International Version. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." All right, hold it right there. We need to understand a little bit about what we're reading. Who were these Magi, anyway? Well, wise men, we understand. Scholars, yes. Priests, perhaps. In fact, much of what the Levites were to the Jews, the Magi were to the Persians. They had a lot of education. They cared about spiritual, godly things. So these Magi came from the east. Where exactly? How far in the east? Who knows? Could have been anywhere from Euphrates to India. You remember Balaam back in the Old Testament? was from the hills of the east near Carchemish along the Euphrates. So it could have been a couple hundred miles, or it could have been Persia, 1,200 miles. And how long did it take them? It just says they came from the east to Jerusalem. That's an awful lot of action in a couple of phrases. Would you agree? What would get them started? What would plant the idea? How would this hatch? And were they all willing, equally enthusiastic, or was there one who really drove this process and the others were kind of reluctant participants? Was there one who was kind of the doubting Thomas of the group who kept saying, "Come on, you guys, this is crazy. What are we doing? We don't know." In fact, we even talk like we know that there were 3 of them. We don't know that either. We know they had 3 gifts. That's what gives us the clue. So really, there's more we don't know about these guys than what we do know about them. Do we know that they rode camels? That's on all the Christmas cards. No, that's part of what we don't know. If they came from the east, if they came from Persia, if they were going a long ways, if they had the means, and we think they did, then it's likely, but we don't know. So how long did it take them? Well, if they were riding camels, they could have done it in 3 to 4 months. And if they were walking, a year. So how did all of this work anyway? We saw his star in the east. So is it possible that they saw a flash of the angel star that woke up the shepherds on that Bethlehem night? Is it possible that they saw that star and it took them a year to get there, or many months anyway? Is it possible? Well, maybe. But remember, when God is involved, when his divine guidance, when his shining star is involved, he can do it any way he wants. He may have started them months in anticipation so that they all ended up at the same time. Wouldn't that be great? But I guess that's another part that we just don't know. I'm sorry. There's a lot we don't know. So let's look at this verse again and see what we do know. Magi, we know they were from the east. They came to Jerusalem. Now, Ellen White gives some insight into the fact that they may have come across some copies of the Old Testament left behind after the Babylonian captivity. It's possible that they were reading Old Testament prophecies, that somehow they became convicted as they studied the prophetic timeline that there was something important going on, and that special star is all they needed to put them over the edge, say, now's the time, we've got to go. And so go they did. And as they followed that star, it took them, well, you'd expect to take them to the capital city, the main, the big place, Jerusalem. Mission accomplished. This was a crazy adventure, but here they come down, descending off the Mount of Olives, looking at the lights of the city, thinking to themselves, as the star lingers overhead, we did it. Good for us. Mission accomplished. Is that what they found? Had they arrived at their destination? Wait a minute. But God was guiding them, was he not? So how did he get them to the wrong place? You said he didn't. That was the right place in God's timing. He wanted them to come ask those questions in Jerusalem, questions that didn't have easy answers. Oh, we need to keep going, don't we? Yeah, they asked, where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Words that got a lot of people thinking, some people worried. King? Newborn king? Herod heard about that. King? Wait a minute. There's only one king here. That's me. And I haven't had any babies lately. So you've got a story to tell. Come tell it to me. So when King Herod, verse 3, heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they replied, for that is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel. These people that he summoned, these priests, these teachers of the law, they knew their stuff, didn't they? Yeah. They could cite chapter and verse. They had it all right here, and they could spit it out. You just ask the question, they've got the answer. And they quoted verbatim, Micah 5:2. Yeah, that's it. You, Bethlehem, though you're the least among the cities of... They knew it. But something hadn't quite happened for the chief priests and teachers of the law. It was all here, but it doesn't sound like much of it got here. They weren't emotionally invested. They weren't moved. They didn't care. It was only information. Oh, they had already heard, Ellen White suggests, they had heard about this angel choir and shepherds, but who listens to shepherds? I mean, you can't trust shepherds. They had already dismissed what little they had heard about this Bethlehem going on. And so this was just a quiz, and they had passed. Thank you very much. Dangerous, isn't it? To know all the right information and not have it mean anything to you. Verse 7. Then Herod, now he's got new information, doesn't he? Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. Why was this important to him? Oh, he was worried, remember? And he was trying to cover all of his bases, and he was trying to put together the facts. He wanted to construct a plan. And so he questioned them. And then sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Do you hear the syrupy language? And do you sense that he didn't mean a word of it? Oh, he wanted to know, but for a very different reason. Worship? No. He had in mind annihilation. He knew. I mean, he was not a local. He had been installed by the Romans, so he knew that his position was a little tenuous. And he had not hesitated in the past to wipe out any opponents. He would not hesitate to do so in the future. That was just the way he did business. So, with now this new information, what do the Magi do? Verse 9, after they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them. Oh, now, wait a minute. Let's put ourselves in the role of the Magi. They get to Jerusalem thinking they're at the right place, thinking they're at the end of the journey, mission accomplished, only to find that their questions raise a lot of people's eyebrows, and there's mumbling, and there's some people put them down and insult them. Finally, they begin to realize nobody in Jerusalem has any inclination that they're on the right track. Perhaps they had misunderstood. Perhaps it was just a wild idea. Perhaps they were wrong all along. Can you sense that discouragement would tend to sit in? Disillusionment? We were wrong. We were flat out wrong. But then when Herod comes back with this, well, it's not here, it's Bethlehem. Oh, really, Bethlehem? How far away is that? Well, fortunately, it wasn't far. Remember, if you've come 1,200 miles already, another 5 is not a big deal. Well, I guess if we've come this far, all right, we'll check it out. But then as they leave Jerusalem, apparently after dark, how do we know that? Well, because they immediately saw what?
The star. The same star that they had seen in the east. The same star continued to lead them. Put a marker on that text. For all the times in your life when you worry about whether or not God is really guiding you, all the times when you question whether or not what you have been doing was the right thing to do, when you wonder if His plan was a good plan, when you have honest questions, remember, the star still shines. Give it time. Allow Him to work His plan. Sometimes the frustrations that we bring are rather temporary. He has a bigger plan, and the star still shines. So, yes, indeed, it went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. It came a little late in the story. I would have thought it would have been a little sooner, but nonetheless, we can certainly understand how all of a sudden that reassuring presence made them think, yes, God is still in this. There's hope. They were overjoyed. Now, verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshiped him. Now, those clues would make me think that they didn't get there along with the shepherds, because where did the shepherds go? The stable. There must have been a little bit of time between the stable and the house. And it wasn't a baby, it was now a child that they found. So it may have been several months, even a year. In fact, based on Herod's calculations, he took care of all the babies 2 years and under. So it could have been a long journey. All the more reason to rejoice with the fact that they finally found the place. Yes, the house. The star stops. They pound on the door. They find somebody with a baby. What did they do? They bowed down and worshiped him. Wasn't high fives, wasn't celebration. It was worship. When you find Jesus, your first instinct is worship. And you only bow down and worship, especially in Old Testament times, you only bow down and worship that which you know to be divine. You don't do that to just any baby. They knew a lot more than they were saying. And what they did tells us a lot about what they knew. Yes, they bowed down and worshiped him. Step number 1, find him. And when you do, step number 2, worship him. Then comes step number 3. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, of myrrh. It's those 3 gifts that make us think maybe there were 3 of them. And those gifts were valuable enough that not just anybody could give them, and so we think they were at least pretty wealthy magi. And they might have been of royal lineage. We don't know. But they gave him what they had planned to give him a long, long time ago. And many have recognized that those are highly symbolic gifts as well. Gold is appropriate, especially for royalty. Incense makes sense if it's a priest. And myrrh is the traditional spice that is used in embalming the dead. Why would you give that to a baby unless you saw a bigger picture? 3 gifts, symbolic gifts, which have set the stage for what we do when we celebrate Christmas today. The idea of giving gifts didn't start with Santa Claus. It started with 3 magi. It started with magi, whether or not there were 3 of them. It's a God thing. You don't worship without giving. That's why every time you come into this place, an offering is received. Not because money is needed, although money is needed. It's because worship involves giving. You can't worship without giving. Have you heard the phrase, you can love without giving, but you can't? No, wait a minute. That's backwards. You can give without loving. We do it all the time. Give to impress. Give to make ourselves feel good. We can give without loving, but you can't love without giving. What the wise men did, it's what we need to do. Do whatever it takes to find the Christ child. And when we do, step number 2, worship him. And a part of that worship will be giving of gifts. Not just to each other, but to him. Doesn't he deserve a special gift this season? And then, having been warned in a dream, they returned to their country by another route. Yeah, even when you question what's going on in your life right now, whether or not God knows where you're at, the real needs that you're facing, the deepest concerns that you have, the doubts, the fears, the frustrations, the prognosis, the medical diagnosis, the lost job, the financial frustration, all of that can overwhelm us, especially at times of tinsel and lights, unless you remember that above it all, the star still shines. So what happened to Gary Snyder and his 2 buddies trapped in that cave atop Mount Hood? It was the night of the 16th day on the mountain. 16 days. When they suddenly realized, wait a minute, it's quiet outside. Over those 16 days, they'd escaped an avalanche, they had fallen into a crevasse, they had dug 6 different snow caves, and had been forced from each one of them. They had been through it. But all of a sudden now, it's quiet. Something is different. They poke their heads out of the snow cave and see above them stars for the first time in 16 days. Looking down to the valley, they could see the lights of Portland. Some of them said, let's get out of here right now. Somebody else said, no, we can't see where we're going. All of our batteries are dead. We don't want to fall into another crevasse. Let's wait until daylight. And so the toughest part of the whole time was waiting from darkness to dawn. And then, seeing sunshine for the first time in 16 days, they packed up their gear and scrambled out of that little hole and barely got above the snow when one of the searchers spotted them. They were taken down the mountain to Mount Hood Lodge and hailed as heroes. It was widely accepted that they survived because they refused to give up. They continued to believe that people were looking for them, that they would be found, and so they did what they could to conserve their body heat, conserve their food, not be thrashing around the mountains, stay where you could, wait for people to come for you. Yes, it was agreed the boys' faith in eventual rescue saved their lives. No matter how bad it got, they refused to give up their faith. To you and I today, no matter how bad it gets, we will refuse to give up our faith. We know our Father is looking for us, that rescue is just around the corner, and that above all, the star still shines.